Everything is perception. So there's this two guys that met in a concentration camp. They moved from concentration camp to concentration camp. And then they met many years after. Those two guys survived by chance and they lived the whole thing experience together. And then they meet and they're like, one, his life is amazing. Like everything is so perfect. And the other one is like in depression. Is like, they live the exact same thing. They blaming the same person. They blaming the same thing. It's all a perception. So you can use suffering through gratitude to grow. You can use suffering to like just, my life is horrible. I keep having always the same thing. Oh, why are you having always the same thing? Because you're not learning from them. In some ways, we can say everything is a test until you pass the test. And all those things, like if you keep receiving over and over again, just maybe bring more awareness and understand what life is telling you.
Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so glad you're here. I am here to remind you that this is a voice of hope, inspiration, and awakening, and I have guests from around the world to talk with me on a variety of spiritual topics to uplift us, inspire us, and to bring hope to us in this earth plane. So just a reminder, you can do all the nice things like subscribe to my YouTube channel and give me a nice rating on Apple Podcasts. What else can you do? You can engage and you can sign up for my newsletter. And you're always welcome to email me and provide any feedback you have on the podcast or write them in the comments. So here is my guest, Philippe Brouillard. He is the founder of VitaQuantum. He's a best-selling author of La Vie Repensée, which is in English, just been translated and is Rethinking Happiness, just recently published. And he's a PhD candidate in the quantum science of health, prosperity, and happiness. His unique method, the quantum source formula, blends quantum physics, neuroscience, and emotional transformation to help people shift from fragmentation to clarity, both energetically and behaviorally. I'm going to let Philippe tell his story, but I'm just going to little spoiler alert that in his past, he was a national mogul ski champion, pretty awesome, and he was a co-founder of a highly successful health clinic. Welcome, Philippe.
Hi, well, thank you. Thank you, Carol.
So glad to have you. We did a little pre-conversation weeks ago, and we should have recorded that. It was really so interesting. Hopefully we can recreate it again today. So let's start with just a few rapid-fire questions so that my guests can so that my listeners can get to know you a little more. Is there anybody in your life who you would characterize as someone who inspired you that comes to your mind now for you to share with us?
So I could name in some ways, for example, my dad. My dad was a medical doctor, but was also in spirituality. He was acupuncturist. That's in '84. He was acupuncturist and medical doctor. So he went against what we usually do, what we should do. Now it's kind of common, spirituality and merging like medical practices and like alternative medicine. But back then, he was very going against what the establishment or everything was. This is how we should do, and he was going against that because it was like, what can I do to help my patients? So if this works, why not use it? So this was one of the inspiration. My PhD mentors is very similar. He was a quantum, and not a quantum. He was at that time a nuclear physicist, Dr. Amit Goswami, and at some point he realized that what his dad was teaching, he was a Hinduist priest. Like 45 years ago, that's when he went to quantum physics and so on. So he was very at the forefront also of this movement of quantum now that we hear now more and more. So it's really people that go against to what should be. And that's how I was always looking for something different. And usually you find this in people that going against what should be.
Going against the flow. I knew I liked you for some reason. If there's a flow, you got to go, why is it going that way?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Going against, and sometimes the flow is the right thing to do, but other times it's like, really, do we all have to do that?
yeah.
Okay. So do you have any words or phrase, anything that you might say inspires your life, or words that you live by?
So I live by the fact that everything in our life, it's our own self creating it.
Ah,
So we should have gratitude for every moment that's happening. It could be a disease, it could be anything. So you're the one creating it. So everything is so beautiful when you start seeing things that way. And so Buddhism are saying that the life is suffering because usually we resist those things. But when we embrace them, we're like, oh, we're the one creating them. They're like just signals and saying like, oh, life is not going in the right direction. Even if going against the direction is, like you were saying, flow can be in some ways good or bad depending how we see it. But it's like, okay. And I've been named like rebels and stuff like this. And there's a phrase that comes to me a lot of times, and I've kind of branded this part as like I'm calling the quantum electroshock. So sometimes when you don't want to hear something, is exactly what you need to hear. And when we want to grow, we don't need to go to suffering like Buddhists are saying. Sometimes you need to have something that just like challenge you and then can shift you. And that's the story and how me and my wife met. When I met her, I was like, "What do you do in life?" She says, "I'm a nutritionist." I told her, "You don't know nothing in nutrition." And she's like, "Who's this arrogant person?" And then she tried to prove me wrong, and I was right because I knew I was coming from functional medicine since already I've been in that world since 27 years. So I've been very at the forefront because of my dad. And she was just coming from school, which is technically the best in Canada in nutrition. And I told her that. And that changed her whole life. So sometimes you're like, she wanted to prove me wrong because she thought she knew better. But sometimes people would say he's just arrogant and they move on. But sometimes, why is it somebody's telling me that? So there's nothing happening by chance. Like Einstein said it, God doesn't play dice. So if this is happening, you're like, what does it mean in my life? So like you're creating everything. You're creating me in your space that's being this maybe electroshock and say, okay, maybe I need to shift something. So that's how I see my life too, and that's how I'm being, and that's perspective. So yeah.
oh, that's so interesting. So, when things happen to us that may or may not be welcome, if
Mm.
we look at it as quantum electroshock, is that what it is? Quantum electroshock?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I love that. So it's like something that's like shocking you into opening yourself to perceive a new reality.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ah, okay. Okay, great. Well, we'll be talking more about that. Last question I have for you is, what is your hope for the world?
So my mission is to create a quantum shift of consciousness. So I'm saying this because a lot of people would say they're kind of aware or conscious, but most of them are not really in that
Mhm.
space. Um, and that's the challenge because there's two words that I work a lot in my business. There's the happiness. First time we need to define what happiness is. A lot of
Mhm.
people doesn't know and understand what it is because government or corporation are there to make money in some ways. So happiness is confusing. And what's freedom? Or we can talk about sovereignty, which is kind of the highest level of freedom. But what's really freedom? So, for example, I live in Mexico. You were talking international, and I'm from Montreal, Canada, and live in Mexico. And I was talking to a client this week, and she's like, "Oh, you're lucky. You're living in Mexico. Why is it luck?" So we create our own prison. I co-author a book in English, and the chapter I wrote was like, "You live in a glass prison, and you're the one that creating that prison, and then you think you're free, but you're not free. You're in the survival mode, which is secure, comfortable, which is how we define our life." So that's I think we need more freedom. We need more real happiness or true freedom, and then this unlocks so many different things. And then you don't live based on the default mode, but you can live on your own creation. So
Okay, so I think we're going to get into the definitions of a lot of these
yeah.
words in a few minutes because it will be very important. So before I want to ask you to briefly tell your spiritual story because I know it's very interesting
Hmm.
how you got to where you are now.
Yeah.
But before we do this, I want to just let the listeners know that you and I will be talking in two different parts. So the first part is now. And we're going to be talking about the science of quantum happiness, what that is, and how to measure transformation beyond circumstances. In part two, we're going to be delving into the intersection of quantum physics and spirituality. So just want to let my audience know that that's where we're headed. So now, Philippe, can you tell us a little bit about your spiritual story
Mhm.
and how you got to what you are doing today at VitaQuantum and everything else that you're doing?
Okay. So at 5 years old, I told my parents, which were already in spirituality and personal development back then, that I'm 43 at the time we were recording that. And so that's a long time ago. And spirituality was not such a thing. And I told them I want to change the world because the world is corrupt at 5 years old.
You saw that at
So,
5 years
so
old.
where does this come from? We're gonna talk about it maybe in part two. But at 8 years old, I was called the smiling one. At 9 years old, I started my spiritual courses while my parents had their adult class. I had my child classes. At 14, I was like, I want to quit school because school is meaningless. And so they sat me in front of the director and telling me I was in the three best admission exam. So the more intelligent student in a private school. So because you're intelligent, you need to stay at school. That's how we're related. But if we look school and no success in life has no link to intelligence, even this is what we've been told, but creativity has a link with life satisfaction, happiness, and so on. But we studies that are done by the NASA show that the school is the main cause why we drop our creativity from childhood from 98% to 2% as adults. So if you're too creative, it's not a good thing. So in reality, so 14 want to quit school, cannot quit school. So finish my secondary. There's kind of pre-university in Canada, which is a bit different than the US and Ontario and the rest. So I was able to quit school at that time because I was doing like 200 ski days per year because I was competing at high level. I was 21 in Canada. So that was my exit. And then and there you find what? You find a lot of intensity. You find like a lot of motion, dopamine, like there's extreme sports. So you find something, even if you're looking for something, you don't know what it is, but you feel like fulfilled in some ways from this extreme things. But I was still looking for something. So I started like NLP, hypnotism, shamanism, and I started trying to figure something out, but I was never able to do it. After many certification and so many different things, I'm like, okay, let's start working for my dad. So my dad was a medical doctor, functional medicine. So I was like, oh, that's very inspiring. That's my new mission in life is transforming healthcare. So that was the way I saw it. So even after multiple years, we closed family business. I started the business with my wife, super successful, seven-figure business. People with chronic pain, chronic fatigue, complex autoimmune diseases were regaining their life back. I was still not feeling fulfilled. So money was there, impact was there, like everything was there, but I was still something was missing. And I did like you name it, almost everything, so many different things. So I'm like, I need to get out of the business. But at the same time, when you're very creative and visionary, you create your glass prison. Like I was saying, I created my
Mhm.
own glass prison. Getting out of there was not easy because I was doing a lot of complex things to simplify the job of my employees and my staff and to get a better experience for our customers. But then all of this is I'm out. Somebody needs to still manage it, improve it. So in some way, you create your own problem of not being free. You go back to the freedom there. So you think you're free, but not really because you create something comfortable and so on. And we're like, okay, I need to get out of there. We try to hire like different business manager to take my role, so trying to form them. I'm like, okay. So then I started looking for something, and when we were in Bali, I landed on this quantum university. I was like, oh, that's interesting, but it's still healthcare, which is I didn't vibrate for that. I wanted something different, and then I landed on the quantum. I don't know what's the name of my program. I don't remember because it's like Indian name, so I never remember the name. Um, so it was the quantum science of health, prosperity, and happiness. I was like, that's interesting. So it's more about being who you are. And when I started my PhD, like all the answers I had like all answered. Because the thing is, we all go to school, we all went to school, fully left brain. School is fully left brain. Creativity is the right brain. So we destroy kind of some ways the right brain. Even if spirituality is very right brain, but we still have this problem. So by understanding everything from, for example, energy work or spiritual things, and this is all right brain, but when we bring the quantum physics, we can explain all of those things. For example, what Buddha was saying, or the shamanists were saying, or the Kabbalah was saying, or the Hinduists were saying, we're like, oh, now we can understand things. And when you understand, it just simplify everything. And also when you have right brain and left brain, your whole body about the survival, which is the part of the brain, the reptilian brain about survival, can let go, because now it all makes sense. If it makes sense, 50% or right brain, which is the intuition, oh, like spirituality, we need to believe it blindly. It makes sense. But it's still the left brain is like, that doesn't make sense. So the unconscious is still in the survival mode. It's like, so this changed everything. So I've passed for a lot of things, like everything was spiritual, but at the same time, my dad was medical doctor and spiritual, like science and spirituality. So I went back to the same thing, but by the back door in some ways. So that's why the book, we co-author, me and my dad, we brought two different perspective and experiences. He's way older than me, so we brought this perspective of like, what is spirituality? And even him, that it's been more than 45 years it's been in that field of spirituality, was very challenged by how I bring things, because a lot of things are just like, oh, there's how it is, but what do you do with it? That's challenging. For example, Buddhists would say, okay, in reality is 99.99999% empty space. What does it do? It's very interesting. It's emptiness or it's energy, but what does it do? I don't know. So yeah, so that's kind of my short story on that experience. So it was always like, why? Nobody answered why. So now quantum
Very
physics bring that
interesting.
why.
Yeah, very interesting. Very precocious child. I think your revelations at age 5 are fascinating. Now, about school, I know this isn't our topic, but I definitely get that school is is left brain focused, but I don't even think it does well with the left brain. I think
I
I
agree
think
on
it's
that.
just yeah, because I mean it's more about rote and doing memorization and not actually learning how to question and how to think critically and how to look at different sides and how to discern, create an argument or create a support for your arguments.
Yeah.
We don't do that very much. It's
Yeah.
just kind of like learn this, learn these facts, spit them back out,
But if
write an
I
essay about them.
if I give a little story of what how the school system is designed, it was designed by the Germany back at the time where the Prush was called. They invaded Poland. They were like, how can we make sure the people from that country don't invade us? So we're gonna brainwash with the school system. So that's how the school system started in some ways. And then it was important in at the end of the 1800s by Rockefeller, Henry Ford, and Carnegie, which were the three richest people at the time, because they were looking, how can we make more money?
How can we get employees,
And Rockefeller
obedient
said,
employees?
yeah, Rockefeller said in 1906, I don't want a nation of thinker, I want a nation of worker.
Yeah.
So if you don't question anything, you just follow the rules, you just follow what we want, and we just make more money out of it. So it was a very economical system, and we still have the same system right now all over the world. And then that's why I say we don't go at the school, we go at the school of work, not the school of life. So we don't
Right,
learn
right,
what living is
right.
about.
We learn
So
how to become employees of
yeah,
corporations,
yeah,
and I did all of it.
yeah.
I wasn't as precocious as you. I did all that. I got the degree that would get me the job, and I worked in the job, and I created a happy life. But we are in this prison that you talk about. Like we think we're free, but we're really just we're really just behaving that in a way that looks free
Mm,
within these kind of these walls that are look clear,
yeah.
but they're really not. If we go up to the edge, we can't get out of it.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting. Once you see that, you can't unsee it.
Yeah, that's correct.
But so many of us still can't see it. And I admit there are many things I know I still can't see. So I'm not going to sit there and say I've got the answer. I see it all. I don't see it all. Whatever, wherever I think I'm free, there's another boundary that's beyond that. So it's fascinating though once you really learn what the education system has been for us.
Mhm.
And I've shared this on other podcasts, but I feel real grief, honestly, about what I feel. I lost,
Mhm.
as a child and as an intelligent, creative being,
Yeah.
going through that system and, putting a square peg through a round hole and, coming out how they want you to.
Yeah.
So like who would Carol have been otherwise? I wonder, I wonder
Mhm.
that a lot.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
that's interesting because it goes to, so we say to be happy in life, you need to go to school, to get a good diploma, to get a good job. Then you get a good job, you get a good salary, then you can have a nice house, you can have technically like the beautiful wife or the beautiful husband, and then you
Yeah. You
get
can go on
kids,
vacations. Yeah.
and then we're looking for something. And even in psychology, they call it the hedonic concept, is every time you attain the next plateau, you feel great, but then after a certain time you go to the same feeling, so you want something more. When you buy a new car, for example, you feel, oh great, you buy a new car. After 1 week, 3 weeks, or whatever it is, you lose that. So
Yeah.
you're looking
Yeah.
for something outside. And that's
Yeah.
how we've been told what happiness is. Even Coca-Cola did an advertising many years ago, and they were saying, drink Coke and be happy. But it's
That's
funny.
what all advertising is.
They should be sued for false advertising, because we know that when you drink Coke, Coke brings disease, and disease bring unhappiness. So we know that. How can you say bring happiness? It
maybe
should not
maybe that
be
moment. I
in the
don't know.
moment. So if it's the moment, then it should be pleasure.
Yeah, let's talk about that then. Let's define this.
Yeah.
We have to define happiness
Yeah.
because I've always thought that happiness was something that fluctuated based on external
Mhm,
circumstances.
mhm. Yeah.
But it sounds like you're defining it differently.
Yeah. So when it's defined by external circumstances, is really what we define as pleasure.
Okay.
Pleasure, we link pleasure. It's funny because in neuroscience they would link pleasure with like dopamine,
Uh-huh.
but happiness is not linked with dopamine. It's more linked with serotonin, for example, and serotonin is way more stable. So it's like we know things, but we don't explain this thing. Even if you look at definition in the dictionary, a lot of time they would put happiness and pleasure in the definition of each other. You're like, that's kind of odd. So we're all pursuing happiness, and studies show that the only guarantee will give you is the pursuit of it, because you'll never be able
Yep.
to attain it. So, which is pleasure, because every time you get pleasure, after a certain time, just go down. So it can be food, it could be sex, or it could be sports, it could be reading a book. Everything of those things can be a pleasureful experience, but it doesn't mean it's going to be bring happiness. So if you still live in like in the reality that we've been used, you stop there, but even we're like asking, okay, well, can we know more about happiness? Is there other people that were talking about happiness? And if you start looking at different spiritual traditions, Buddhism or Hinduism, and so on, they all say something similar, that the goal of life is happiness. So you're like, that's interesting. Because they never think that you get stuff from outside. Even Buddhism would say like
Hmm.
attachment to things outside or inside, whatever it is, to your ego, to how you look, or that's bring you suffering. So this won't be happiness. So it has to be something different. So if the goal of life they're saying also is enlightenment, then you're like, is there a link between happiness and enlightenment? So my teacher defined happiness as an expansion of consciousness. So the more you are being aware of what life is about, the more you raise who you are, the more your vibration goes up, the more your happiness goes up along the time. So my teacher defined like a 7 scale of happiness, which is 0, where it's mostly people that has psychiatric issues. Like there's no, that's why he says 0, because there's no happiness, there's nothing. They're in their own world and think that that's reality, but they're fully disconnected of everything. And mostly those people would need like to see a psychiatrist or something like this. And then at level 1, for example, it's psychosis. It's mild, but it's still like cognitive issues. And then he would say level 2 is where Most everybody is, like 95% of the population is there. You call it the basic human level condition, defined by four main things: the addiction of information. So in that world today, we consume so much information.
Yeah.
We feel great. We're like, I've read like 100 books this year. Yay. But there's no meaning. We're just consuming stuff. That's mean doing more, doing more, doing more. But we know if we really want to understand something, you need to sit down and question it and ponder about it and debate about it or teach about it. Teaching is the best way, but just reading a book for reading a book. Now, the new tendency is like if you want to be a good CEO, you need to read 50 books a year. And then there's an app called Blinkist or something that they just give you a resume, but you don't have the meaning. But that's
Wow.
the tendency.
Yeah.
We want to
Yeah.
consume so much
Yeah.
things so fast. Social media, we started from Facebook at the beginning, was kind of a slow way, and then TikTok, Instagram was faster, and TikTok is like even more faster. Now they all adapt to it because like lifespan is so fast, so slow. So reading a book, taking 4 or 5 hours to read a book is like, huh? But then you want to read more book because you're doing check, check, check. And every time you're checking something, you feel good, but there's no
Hmm.
meaning to it. So you become addicted to information. Then there's the me centeredness. So we're so centered around ourselves. So we do things to get something. We're being the nicest person for, I give the example, like the highest level, people would say, I'm not centered on myself. I'm no egoistic. And then there's this person, like he's always saying yes to everybody. He's always smiling. Life is beautiful, but he's so lonely and lack of love for himself that every time he do something, he's receiving love from outside.
Hmm.
So that's the person that everybody's abusing because he's like always saying yes, but why is he doing? He's not doing this for without attachment to anything. He's doing for receiving love from outside. And that's why it's like this is kind of the extreme example, but we do it for so many different things. And then there's the negative emotions dominating our life. We're so ingrained in this, and our brain is designed this way. It's like the negatives, like Velcro in our brain. It sticks so much, versus like the positives, like the Teflon. It just pass by. So if you're being negative with your wife, for example, your husband, you need to put a lot of positive to just change this because our brain is designed to remember the negative because negative technically is survival. But now survival is not there, but we're still living in the same way. Our boss is the lion, or our friends or whatever it is. We see it the same way, but it's very, very different. And the last one is the addiction to pleasure. So we become addict to any behavior now. There's Dr. Amen, not Dr. Amen, the brain specialist. There's the Dr. Gabar Mate that talks about
Hmm.
addiction.
Hmm.
And so when I found this book, I was like, yeah, I 100% agree because this is exactly what it is. We're addicted to so many different things when we cannot stop doing the same thing over and over again. It could be simple things. It could like just biting your nails. It could be just reading books every night because you don't feel good. So you need to read a book because then you go somewhere else. So you read novels, for example. It's a great thing, but it's still an addiction. So if you cannot do, so the thing is, anything that you cannot stop doing is an addiction, and this camouflage something. So it camouflages suffering that's present. If there's suffering, you cannot be in happiness. So just putting, I was in a course, for example, you have a beautiful pie on the, but inside is just mud. It's just crap, but you don't see it. You're always putting camouflage on it. So it's look nice,
Hmm.
but it's still suffering in the bottom. We do this everywhere. Everybody does this. If somebody doesn't do it, we call them Buddha or Jesus or people that are at a different level, technically. So we all have something to learn. And just to prove that all of this is kind of through things, there's a paradox of progress. We've evolved so much in the last few 10, like 50 years, for example. We have more information than ever. We have more knowledge than ever. We have the highest level of comfort as ever, but we're sicker and unhappier than ever.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's something we don't understand. I was talking about the school of work versus the school of life. We don't know what living is about. So if we understand, for example, what spiritual tradition says the goal of life is enlightenment or raising consciousness or happiness, if we're just playing with words, they saying the same way. So what do we do in life? Where do we invest our time? Where do we invest
Mhm.
our effort for this? And that's a challenge. So if we say, okay, I realize that I cannot do pleasure and happiness at the same time. I know, understand like pleasure is very external, usually, mostly, all the time. And pleasure is not bad by itself, but it's always a choice. What do I want to do out of my life? And we notice that most people that grow around spirituality, usually the less stuff they're buying, the less stuff they need to be happy. Because they realize that the more we grow as a person, the less stuff I need because I still fulfilling myself from inside. I don't need things from outside. So it's a big liberation for a lot of people in that space. And if you look most spiritual tradition, people has nothing almost. Buddhist has like two or three robes. They're the same thing. They live detached to things, but now they're being challenged because kids, even in Buddhist temple, in the middle of Nepal, middle of nowhere, they have phones now with the internet and they see social media and they see what we have and they think, oh, maybe what they have would make them happier. So like, interesting. Yeah.
So let me just ask you a few questions.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Is is suffering like something we want to not have, or is suffering also something that is good,
Hmm.
or that
Yeah.
helps launch us in some way that we
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
grow through suffering? And then what is the goal? Is the goal that we recognize all of our addictions and release our addictions and live at this state of happiness?
Mhm. Okay. So is suffering necessary? Most of the time, I would say yes, because that's the only way we can learn. That's what Buddhists are saying in that space. But if you see that something that's not aligned with what you want in life, this is usually when you suffer. Instead of like suffering, you can just bring gratitude to it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So it's the same thing. Everything is perception. So there's this two guys that met in a concentration camp. They moved from concentration camp to concentration camp. And then they met many years after. Those two guys survived by chance and they lived the whole thing experience together. And then they meet and they're like, one, his life is amazing. Like everything is so perfect. And the other one is like in depression. And like, they live the exact same thing. And they blaming the same person. They blaming the same thing. It's all a perception. So you can use suffering through gratitude to grow. You can use suffering to like just my life is horrible. I keep having always the same thing. Oh, why are you having always the same thing? Because you're not learning from them. It's like in some ways we can say everything is a test until you pass the test. And all those things, like if you keep receiving over and over again, just maybe bring more awareness and understand what life is talking to you, what life is telling you. So for example, I was going to Toronto last weekend. I was speaking in front of 2,000 people. And 3 days before, I started to have throat pain and have like kind of flu symptoms. I was like, that's not too good. Flu symptom, throat pain, talking on that opportunity was my first big speaking opportunity. And I was like, okay, let's just bring gratitude to it. That's what I did instead. And then the following morning, everything was gone. I was like, that's interesting. That's interesting. Usually that's kind of the beginning of what's gonna just getting worse and worse and worse. Instead of like getting freaked out and stressing about it and was like, oh, I'm gonna miss this or no, it's just okay, whatever it is. Life is sending me something. I don't know what it is. But if I just bring gratitude to it, just shift and everything was great. And so I could either bring that suffering and maybe create it even worse, or just being okay with it. It's not easy. It's easy to say about it. Oh, like you have cancer, just bring gratitude to it. But it's like, it's one of my friend got her cancer and she wrote a book about it. And she called it in French, but in English would be The Gift of Cancer. Because that's the
Mm-hmm.
thing that changed her whole life. And she's like, oh, that's the wake up, that's the electroshock she received in some ways.
Yeah, yeah.
But she was open to look about it. Sometimes people are not open to look about this.
Yeah, I've interviewed a few people like that. I think we live in a world that I think wants to keep us in the prison in some way, because what really is being fueled is many of us have been victimized.
Yeah.
Our society victimizes so many of us. We're victims of this. We're victims of this social situation or that social situation. And that's the way it is. And we need to correct the whole social situation
Mhm.
in order to help these people over here, help these people over here. And like, is that true?
Yeah, that's amazing because when we look, French Revolution, the Bastille, which was one of the main prison back then, was kind of opened up by the population. They opened up to free the prisoners. Most prisoners didn't want to go out.
Mm,
Why? It was secure, it was known, they know what to expect. Now, if they go out, they need to face things that they don't know how it's going to happen. They need to start working to find things to survive, and they wanted to stay inside. And when you look at the definition of like those things, when you change the word for prisoners or like belief, it's almost the same thing. It's very, very surprising. So like I'm prisoners and for prison, I'm prisoner of my belief. It's we can change. That's what I do in my course at some point when we talk about belief. And I bring this analogy and I bring the definition. I just change one words, which like belief, prisoners, and those things, and they're like it's the phrase exactly stands the same way. So we're prisoners of our belief, and we think that life is a certain way. What life is not what we believe is. That's why Buddhism says that biggest suffering in life is not understanding life by itself. And the Hinduists were saying, Maya, we live in an illusion. And now quantum physics says we live in the matrix, we live in an illusion, we live in a simulation, and so on. So we're starting to see that those things were already said for thousands of years, but we started to understand the saying of those things. And now it makes more sense. Even the Dalai Lama says spirituality without quantum physics is an incomplete picture of reality.
mm,
So we understand part of it, and he knows a lot about it. And he did groups many, many years ago. He was inviting quantum physicists and so on to have debate and try to understand the link between spirituality and quantum physics. And it, for him, he was wow. So we need to have both to really understand what we're living now. So if we don't understand life, now we're at the effect of things. We're at the effect of our job or so what society brings us. So we're not creating our reality. And then that's why we suffer so much in life.
well, I think if you're a person who reminds people or tries to awaken
Yeah.
people that this is in your control.
Mhm.
You are creating this.
Yeah.
It is the appearance of a victim of being victimized by
Yeah.
this huge, by your past, by your
Yeah.
ancestors,
Yeah.
by your government, by your social system,
Yeah.
by your how much money you have, whatever it is. It's just so popular.
Mhm.
You tell them you can make a difference in the world we live in now, or you can change. You know, you have power in your life.
Yeah.
You can do this.
Yeah.
You are not a victim. You can come out of this prison. Generally speaking, people want to stay in the prison, I
Yes.
think,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's easier to stay there and complain and say these things are happening to me than what you say about the prisoners in Bastille.
Yeah.
How am I going to do this? I don't know.
Yeah.
How am I going to start a company? How am I going to be my own boss? How am I going to take care of a family or myself and all of that? It's much easier to let the system do it for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, see, I believe that we have a divine spark in us. We are amazing, very powerful beings, and that we have so much ability. And we've been convinced that we're we're these little things, these little pawns on a chessboard. But it seems like it's so much work to people. And perhaps that's an addiction in itself.
Yeah.
So how do we get people, or maybe we don't, maybe we just look for the people who want to be happy to learn how to live in this state of happiness, learn how to take control,
Yeah.
rather than say, how can we help people out there in the world live in happiness?
Yeah. Yeah. So if we look, my mission is not about okay, let's work people with that are just ready. But I
Yeah.
think the more we focus also that the people are not ready, the more we'll create a shift. So one thing I like to bring, there's a study that This study fascinated me. So what they took people and they gave them two choices. So the first choice is you get 50% of chance to get an electroshock, so a real one. So it's very painful. The other option is 100% of chance of getting the electroshock, so full pain. So, for example, Carol, what do you choose, 50% or 100%?
Well, if those are my only two choices,
Yeah.
I'll go with 50%.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But right now, your neurological system is freaking out because he doesn't know what's going to happen.
Uh-huh.
So he
Uh-huh.
prefer the pain, even if it's known. So we prefer suffering in the known and what we are used to, what's predictable. So we stay in a job that we don't like because we know the boss, we know the coworkers, we know the
We know what
salary,
to expect.
we know to
Yeah.
expect. So our brain is always trying to predict the future for survival. But we're not surviving. We now have the possibility to thrive, but we're still sticking there. So the first thing is to understand that it's not your fault. You've designed in some ways to stay there because we're still in the survival mode. So to say, okay, I'm gonna jump and change my job. Hmm. Are you sure you want to do this? Yeah, you have a good salary, you have good benefit. Da, 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 da. That's what your friends would say, and then you're like, yeah, maybe I'm gonna stay there. So it's the same thing with the husband. People would stay together, or when it's oh, it doesn't work, let's just change. Now it's like 50% of divorce. When it doesn't make sense, we just change because it's getting too uncomfortable and we don't want to be uncomfortable. So let's start something new. And then after five, six, that
It
doesn't
comes
work. You're
back.
like, always the same thing. The same thing happens to me over and over again. So Einstein was saying God doesn't play dice. There's nothing by chance. There's nothing by coincidence. So everything is programmed in some ways by someone or some or whatever. It could be God, but at the same time, when we're saying God, then we're still living in a world where everything is dualistic. Spirituality says everything is one. And then people in spirituality, yes, we agree, but then we're still living in this duality and this dichotomy. People say, like, yes, we're one, but we're still living as dual person all the time. So how can we bring the gap between those two? And that's when we bring the quantum physics perspective, the observer effect. So if you're not familiar with it, I'll just describe it quite
Mhm.
fast. So if we throw an electron, so electron, a photon is like a particle of light. If we throw this in space, it's nothing. There's nothing happening. There's just energy and waves until somebody looked at it, and then it's become the particle. So everything in reality is energy. Yeah? We were saying Buddhism at the beginning, 99.999% empty space. It's energy. In reality, quantum physics shows that. Even when you try to remove everything from space and you create a vacuum, we still have energy in there. It's like you cannot remove everything, it's impossible. So everything is energy. And then when we observe the energy, it becomes matter. So we're saying, for example, consciousness create matter and not the opposite around. Even if for materialistic researcher, Newtonian physics researcher, people that are in the normal world in some ways and the actual world, they're like, no, it's impossible. We need matter to create something. But have you tried to grab consciousness? In my perspective, I've never been able to do it. And we get so much paradox in that space. But when we say it's consciousness that creates everything, now all the paradox disappear. So you're like, that's interesting. So when you have duality, it doesn't work. So if we go back to this thing, so the observer is like me watching something, and when I watch something, it materialized, and it's just probability. So there's all probability when we throw the photons, and it can be somewhere there, but when we look at it, it just appear. And our life is the same thing. So our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings, all just energy. We can calculate them. We can use different machine to calculate those things. So if those things are energy, and then we focus enough, we can create our life. So we're the creator of our own reality based on quantum physics. But then who's the person observing reality? So that's the other perspective. It's the observer, but who's observing? Is my past, my traumas, and so on, is the one creating the reality. So that's why I said that in life, you don't get what you want. You get what you need to evolve. because you're just creating things from your past, creating from those things, and then like, why I'm not always getting what I want. The life is not about getting new stuff. Who cares
Yeah.
about this? So it's
Yeah.
always sending you things to evolve. It could be suffering. We go back to what we were saying. So you're the one creating your suffering because you need to grow out of it. And the beauty of it is like when you start playing a video game. If you ever played a video game once in your life, you know, when you start with level one, it's super simple because you're not good enough to master level 100. And life is the same thing. We won't, like, you will never put yourself things in your life that you cannot master. So there's never something too big to master. But it demands like maybe grit, it demands courage. And for me, courage is not jumping from a plane. That's kind of insanity or stupidity, because it's just, even if I was doing a lot of those things before, but the real courage is facing who you are. And that's why kind of the scariest place right now for people is boredom, because you don't need
Hmm.
to be, there's no other chance to be with yourself. So that's why like we're like taping our phones in our face to not get bored, because we're getting entertained, so we don't need to be inside. So it's kind of an addiction to camouflage who we are. So we go back to all those things, to whatever happened in your life. You're the one creating all of this. Life is simple, but we make it so complex.
Well, let's talk about like, okay, let's talk about somebody who was actually victimized by something, whether it was child abuse or abusive spouse or, whatever social group was oppressed.
Yeah.
What do we say to that person? Because, it doesn't sit well to say, you're in control of your life, you can fix it.
Mhm.
How do you, how do you bridge that for the average person
Yeah.
who has experienced some kind of trauma? We've all experienced some kind of trauma, but we don't want to sound insensitive,
Mhm.
but we also want to speak truth.
Okay. Okay. So I like to give example. So if you're familiar with Louise Hay, which is Hay House Production, she wrote books and she started a huge movement. So she was raped. She talks about her story. She was raped. She was abused. She was in the foster cares, and she switched that experience to create an empire of consciousness, to raise consciousness. She's the biggest publisher in consciousness book and so on. She took responsibility for things. And when you take
Mhm.
responsibility, you can shift and change. If you stay the victim, nothing can happen. So for a lot of times when I would say you're 100% responsible for your cancer, for being raped or those kind of things, it's like, no, it's not my fault. But if you're the one that created it, it means you have the power to shift it. If it's
Yeah.
just change, then being a victim makes sense. But if it's not chance and you're the one creating and you're like, okay, why do I create this in my life? What do I need to learn? So it gives you power, but it's not easy. If it's easy, everybody would be Jesus, Buddha, or whatever. We would all be enlightened, but life is not this. So I was going back to the concentration camp. Some person like, wow, his life is fabulous. And the other one is depression and life is so dramatic. And so it's perception. What should I need to learn from this? How can I bring gratitude? But it's hard to say, I've been raped and I need to bring gratitude out of it. It's not easy, but you're like, why I'm creating this in my life?
Yeah.
So,
The people who do that really do experience
oh
transformation.
yeah, oh
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a completely different experience,
yeah.
and I talk to so many people on this podcast, and I've talked to many people who have, transcended
Mhm.
so much suffering
Yeah,
and really become powerful people. And I always say if you see this one person doing it,
yeah,
it's not unique to them.
exactly.
They're just showing you what's possible.
Yeah, yeah.
That to me was what the Christ was, or
Mhm.
Buddha, or
Yeah,
whoever
yeah,
we want to pick. They showed us what was possible
exactly.
in consciousness.
Yeah.
And yet we sit there and go, oh, we worship you, or oh, that's special to you. It's
Hmm,
not
hmm.
me.
Yeah,
But it is for all of us.
exactly, exactly. And interesting. So if I talk a little bit my thesis,
Yeah.
so in my thesis we were, so it was a 3 months program what we did, and so it's about changing your perception of reality based on quantum physics and spirituality. So we were challenging your belief on a lot of different things, And so at the end of the program, I was asking them, how happy were you at the beginning, now that you know what happiness is? And now, how happy are you at the end? And another question I was asking, there's a lot of different numbers that we speak about, but this one was quite interesting. So, did you experience anything like this that was like challenging, dramatical in your life? Some people died around you that were close, or loss of job, like divorce, or I think that's usually are very high on the stress level.
Hmm.
And the people that answered that didn't experience anything, the average increase in happiness was 22%. The people that experienced something dramatic, the increase was 71%.
And the increase was because of your program
Yeah,
or
the
because,
program.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
during the
So
program
interesting. All
specifically.
right. So, all right. That's very interesting. All right.
So
So they're all
people
in the
that
same
experience,
program.
so they're on the same program, and then I can cross references some questions, and people that didn't experience anything was 22% raise, and if they experienced something was 71%, more than
Well, you could
three
say they started a
times.
different baseline, perhaps. Do you think?
So this didn't matter because I was asking, how did you see yourself before, and now how do you see
Okay.
yourself? So they're the one that rated the numbers. So overall, so the raise was 36% in general. But if you didn't experience something intense in your life, you didn't grow as much as if you
Mm.
experienced something. So it goes with what Buddhists are saying. Life is suffering, and it's through suffering that you grow the most. So if you want a life that has no challenge, then you might not be in the right place. So a lot of people are saying, "Oh, my life is perfect. Everything is flowing all the time." I'm like, how strongly do you play in life to grow? Some are like super comfortable, like 9 to 5 job, go in the restaurants there, go with friends, drink there, go to boating, go vacation. Like there, everything is out of pleasure and like life is great. But then you start having a conversation. Then, how's your relationship with your husband or your spouse? Yeah, but it's not that good. Then how's work? Oh yeah. So overall, life is good. But when you go deep down in different departments of their life, different sectors, it is not as good as they think, because then they put all the pleasure on it and life is great. I knew somebody super rich, all the pleasureful that things all the time. But then at some point we spoke, he's like, my relationship is really not going well. They got divorced and da, da, da. But it was just about all those external things. There was never like having conversation with their wife and their spouse and so on. So the more challenged you are, like my study shows, the happier you'll become. So that was
Hmm.
for me, wow, that's very, very interesting. So despite those challenges, how can you bring gratitude? Because you know those challenges will make you grow. So that's why it's like if you bring gratitude to those moments, you're just gonna go faster. So it's a choice, but sometimes not easy. So if it's a rape or a cancer or whatever it is, or for example, if we talk about cancer, there's so many different studies that shows like instant remission because people have changed their own life.
Hmm. Hmm.
So your life is a reflection of who you are. In the quantum observer effect, I'm saying like you're the creator of your reality. And when you observe your reality, you understand who you are. So the reality is only a reflection of who you are. So the more you understand this, the more you can shift. So that's something to ponder. You're like, okay. So if I'm creating everything and I'm being aware and conscious of what's happening, then I can grow. So you don't need to go to suffering specifically because you're so aware of things. So when you get a cancer, I say cancer because usually that's the extreme thing. There's a lot of different things that you didn't listen before, and now is like the
Hmm.
strongest one. It's like if you don't listen, death is coming at some point. That's kind of a lot of cancer will bring you to death. So, and sometimes it's that what you need to learn, and because you don't listen, and it's fine. That's part of life, and you'll move on, and that's it. But we get attached to so many things that nah, nah. So yeah, the perspective of human being is very interesting for this.
Is your thesis complete?
My thesis is not final. We're finalizing the data right now. So my teacher has a good part of it. As of right now, he's reviewing. So we're in that part of reviewing, optimizing to then submit the thesis. So technically, hopefully by November it's submitted, and then I just need to defend it. So can't wait to finalize this part.
And your thesis, I mean, you just shared
Yeah.
about our suffering and how we can grow through that. What is the bottom line of your thesis?
So bottom line is, if we see the world from a world where everything is energy, where everything is possible, where life is about growth, versus more like the Newtonian physics where everything is matter, where life is about getting stuff and so on, we can transform in a short time of period. And so, for example, we can look the overall life satisfaction raised by 17%, symptoms dropped by 34%. We didn't talk about health or nutrition or
Yeah, we didn't
sports.
get to health. Yeah.
No, we don't talk about this in the
Yeah.
program. But
Yeah. Okay.
34% drop in symptoms, which is quite interesting for a lot of people. Stress, 33.4%. So neurotransmitter, how the brain function in some ways, like the hormones of the brain in some ways, raised by 40% improvement. So happiness, I'd said it 36%. How people perceive their life in a positive matter, raised by 20%. And one thing for me was always, for me, when you change so much. So if we talk about change demands time. So when you change, it's kind of a step by step process. You change slowly. When you have a transformation, I would say it's more like a quantum leap. It's more instant.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody is close to you and is losing weight, you don't really see it because you see it every day. But if somebody that you didn't see for like 3 weeks and you're like, and lost like 20 pounds, you're like, oh, what happened? So that's the impression between change and transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was asking the question is, did anybody in your surrounding told you that you have transformed or changed or something happened in you? And out of the people that says somebody told me something that I have changed or I'm lighter or I'm happier and so on, people that were told something like this, happiness increased by 81%. And people that nobody told them was 31%. So it's very interesting that if you're able to raise who you are such a level, people can perceive the change. That's a good way to see if really you're changing. Because if people doesn't say anything, you can feel better, but it's still not being expressed. So when it's being expressed, it's because there is a huge change in you. And that's for me was like, okay, we're going somewhere there. Because if you're doing this and you change so much, then what happened? You inspire people too. And they were like, oh, what's happening? Yeah? For example, if you want to lose weight, I bring weight because it's kind of an easy way. If you want to lose weight and you see somebody that's losing weight, you're like, how? What did you do?
Yeah.
So if you become lighter, happier, more joy, or more free, and people see it, they're gonna ask you, "What are you doing?" So that's how we're gonna create a shift of consciousness. If we're shifting enough strongly, and then we inspire others to do so. And for me, this was quite a very interesting data. I thought intuitively that would make sense. Now I have the data that shows that, and I was like, that's very interesting. But I think
Now,
yeah, go ahead.
well, I just want to. How do you measure increases in happiness? Is this like a self-reporting, some
So
scale
yeah,
that you have
so it was
people?
self-reporting and that level and that specific thing. So that's why I was asking. So that challenge is, so at the beginning of the program, we can use different questionnaires that show how positive you see life and so on. And at the end of the program, if I use the same questionnaire, which I used, but people see life very differently now. Because if so, you thought maybe you were positive before, but now you understand what life is, and you're like, oh shit, I was
Mm-hmm.
not positive before, even if I said in the questionnaire I was positive. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the challenge in the questionnaires that I've used. But and everything I would use as questionnaire, that's the challenge. Because if you're shifting, you think you were happy, but you realize you were not happy, but you put in the questionnaire you were happy. So for me, I use mostly the last questionnaire where I was asking you, how do you see yourself before and after? Because now they understand what really happiness is. And that's why I use this data, which is very just one question before and after, because outside of that, you were not the same person before. So,
Hmm. Yeah, when you have a complete change in perception
yeah,
of life,
yeah.
everything is different.
Hmm.
And that's
So,
what you call transformation.
yeah. And one result that I felt very interesting about it is um, mystical experiences. So mystical experiences, kind of the highest level of spiritual transformation. We can say it's a oneness experience. You experience something very greater than yourself. Um, and there's a questionnaire used specifically in research. They use it mostly when people do psychedelics to create those kind of events. So it's
Uh-huh.
a questionnaire is really used for research specifically, and usually psychedelics would create between 30 to 40% of mystical experiences, but they could be have side effects on that. So I'm not a big fan of those things. So I think you need to do the work. I sometimes call it like the fast food of spirituality. You just take a pill and it's done.
It's
Um,
like the medical system.
yeah. So I'm, for example, Dr. Gabar Mate use a lot of this, but people that are very at in level 0, level 1, people has no ability to do transformation. But most
Uh-huh.
people that listen to us, for example, they're in the work, they're doing the work, and they're like, oh, let's fast track the whole thing. So that's why for me, I call it the fast food of spirituality. It's like if you eat at McDonald's, your feed first fast was easy, it might taste good, but there's a side effect to it. So everything usually that's a quick fix, I question the thing. That's how I see life. So, for example, my program, we had the 12% mystical experiences in 3 months, which is fantastic because life doesn't trigger mystical experiences. Usually you face something very challengeful. It could be a disease, it could be a near death experience, or those kind of things would kind of triggers those kind of things. But to have some things where you do the work and you trigger that with a 12% of participants that experience that, it's quite fascinating on that perspective. So I'm always trying to, okay, how can we create more? How can we create more? And the thing is, in life, if you attach to something, you're like, I want to create more. I want to not create, but I want to experience more of them. You're being attached to it. And when you're attached to something, there's no more possibility because the reality is already created. So you're not doing it. So you need to let go. So that's a challenge. Most of the time, people never expect them. And now they try to replicate them. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So
It could be another addiction.
yes, exactly. Everything
Yeah.
is at some point you're like, oh, I kind of want one because somebody had it, or I want to live this. And yeah, because study shows when you have a mystical experience, you have a shift, a quantum shift in your expansion of consciousness and so on. So when you have those, you know there's something happening there. But it does not need to have this to have transformation.
Yeah.
But it's the new tendency. I know somebody like wrote like the 6 mystical experience, this kind of mystical experience. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of trying to get more people get to it because people crave those things now. That's the new thing. So let's take a fast food thing to get those things now.
I'm so with you. The co-founders of Unity, which is my ordination, they always would say, Myrtle Fillmore would always say that there's this, you can get really involved in the angelic and crystals and all of those mystical
Yeah,
experiences, and it can be an addiction that is drawing you away from the inner journey.
yeah.
And I get approached all the time for people to be on my podcast. And a lot of it is that stuff out there,
Mm-hmm.
which can help
Yes, yeah,
people,
yeah, yeah.
but we can become fixated on that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then it's another thing that
Yeah,
has, we think we're not being material, we're in the spiritual realm, but are we really?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Philippe, we're at our hour. So I think we should
Perfect.
close this one
Yeah,
and then we'll come back with part 2. Normally, I would ask you to provide your last words, but I'm going to ask you to do that in our part 2.
perfect.
I really appreciate the conversation we've had. If there's anything you didn't say that you want to say, we can save that to part 2.
Yes, yes.
But this is such an exciting conversation, and I really appreciate you being on.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. Check in with our part 2, and I now close the Spiritual Forum.